If I'm trying to come up with an idea for something, the best way to do it is to put yourself under a lot of pressure and to give yourself, ideally, a limited time frame and just come up with it. That's it. And so what happens is you literally become adrenalized. You're excited about this. Your blood is flowing. And that's when you have good ideas.
That was advertising legend Vinny Warren, and I'm John Lee.
And I'm Martin Nutty, and welcome to another episode of Irish Stew, the podcast for the global Irish nation.
This episode of Irish Stew is sponsored by the Irish Heritage Tree Program. Celebrate your Irish roots by planting native trees for family and friends in the beautiful Golden Vale of Ireland. Go to irishheritagetree.com and use the exclusive discount code today. It's IrishStew10 for 10% off. That code again is IrishStew and the numeral 10. Keep the heritage of Ireland green and growing by going to irishheritagetree.com.
Hi, this is Martin Nutty with the Irish Stew podcast. And welcome to the first episode of season 3. I'm joined by my partner in crime, John Lee. Welcome, John.
Hey, Martin. Good to be back. Good to launch a new season. We launch it in fine style with a gentleman from Galway, now of Chicago, someone in the advertising industry. And believe me, you know his work. It sounded something like this.
Pick up good yardage on the play. You know, the best part of this defense is their defensive line and their interior
Hello?
linebacker.
WASSUP! WASSUP! Yo, who's that?
Yo, pick up the phone.
Hello? What's that?
What's up, Vinny Warren?
What's up with you? How are you doing, man?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us here.
You're welcome.
Tell us a little bit about that commercial, and we'll get into it in more detail. But maybe the global impact that you found from that ad.
Well, yeah, the funny thing about that ad was we intended it to be a hit in the USA because that was where we are, and that's where we were advertising. And thanks to the internet, it became this global phenomenon. Actually, specifically email. Everybody had email around 2000, and it spread through email around the world. And I remember shortly after we did the first one, which was in December 99, I was in Ireland in March, and I was kind of trying to escaping from the WASSUP phenomenon, which is full on here. And I was in Ireland, in Galway, in the standing outside a pub at around midnight, and all these young Irish guys came out of the pub, and they were all shouting WASSUP at each other. And I was like, how on earth could they have known about this? Because it only aired on American TV. And then it dawned on me they'd seen it online. And I was kind of like, oh my God, this is serious now, because I never thought it would be seen beyond the USA, But suddenly people that mattered to me were going to see it,
Oh, God. Evidence of a new world.
Yeah.
You were on a visit to Galway, and that's your origin point, so to speak.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about the Vinny Warren Galway origin story.
Well, I was originally from there, born there and raised there, and went to college there as well, actually, to UCG. So I spent my entire life before I emigrated in Galway. I never moved away until I moved away. And while I was there, I actually had a job that turned out to be influential in my life later on. I worked in a bar in Galway that was comedically busy. It was like Mardi Gras every night. And I worked there for like 5 years through high school and college. I just loved it. It was hilarious, fun to work there. And it gave me sort of an insight into young drinkers and why they drink, what they drink. And, I saw brands come and go and get introduced. So it was very interesting from that point of view. And Galway was just a great creative place to grow up. I mean, I didn't do anything particularly creative there while I was there. But while I was there, there was great theater. The music scene was amazing. And the party scene, the pubs were amazing. So it was a very kind of idyllic place to grow up, really, in a lot of ways.
So you kind of think of yourself as a creative person, which makes perfect sense to me. But is that something that was in the family background or what's behind all that?
No, it wasn't really. It was more my decision to get into advertising was based on me not being any good at anything else and having no skills beyond watching TV, really, and which I did a lot of, and it helped me out later on. But so my interests were sort of like I was interested in psychology of people, why people do what they do, and advertising is adjacent to that, psychology and advertising. And I was interested in pop culture as well, and advertising uses that sometimes as well. And so those were my interests, and that led me to advertising. But I was never creative in the conventional sense of the artistic sense of being able to draw or play an instrument or anything like that. But I could come up with funny ideas, and I could come up with ideas for Budweiser and strategic thinking. That's another element of advertising which I liked. So all those things combined really are what interests me, not strictly speaking the creative part,
So when you're sitting doing your job in the Galway pub, were you mulling over this master plan to enter the advertising industry? Because usually pub work isn't, the standard entree into Madison Avenue type life, right?
Well, it wasn't, no. And at the time, I had no idea what I wanted to do, really. When I worked in the pub, I had no idea. So it wasn't really, it didn't really come into play at that time. That was a problem. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so when I went, what happened was I went to England to London, shortly after college. And while there, I worked for ITV, the independent television network. And I got a glimpse sort of into the world of advertising. And I kind of just had this feeling, yeah, this is for me. I could do this. So I took this class, evening course in London, advertising course, where you went to different agencies week by week. And it was very good. It was very, illuminating in terms of what the business was like. And I just liked it. I liked everything about it. And I decided that was for me. I think I was like 22 when I decided that.
Vinny, were there any ad campaigns from Ireland or your time in England that really stuck out to you?
Oh yeah, I mean that was the thing. I had the great good fortune to grow up in the 80s, and we had UK TV. We could watch that, and so I was very influenced by the beer campaigns that came out of England in the 80s. They probably wouldn't be known over here, but like Carling Black Label was a big one, very influential on me. Holston Pills, there was a ton of them, and that was very influential on me. And the Guinness stuff too was very good. There was a lot of really great advertising in the 80s in the UK. This was the heyday of Charles Saatchi and all those guys, and when advertising had a real influence on the culture.
So, Vinny, what brought you over to the States?
Well, literally what brought me over was a green card. I was living in London, and like many of my generation, I'd applied for one of these Donnelly or Morrison visas. And I was in London, and I got a letter saying, hey, I got it. So you got 6 months to come here. So I just decided to come to New York, actually, which was where I came to first.
Oh, snap.
There you go.
We entered the country in the same manner.
Queens, specifically.
But I guess, from an American-centric point of view, people, kind of think of advertising as being Madison Avenue, at least as a New Yorker. That's got it. Now, that's probably not entirely fair. But it kind of makes sense to me that you would fetch up in New York. But from what I understand, your entry into New York life, let's say, and in the advertising industry wasn't exactly conventional.
Yeah, well, one of the things I decided when I came to New York was that I didn't want to get into a job like I'd had in England working for a media company. I wanted to do the creative part of advertising. And so one of the decisions I made was to take jobs that would look bad on a resume, kind of, So one of the first jobs I had, the first job I had when I came over here was a horse and carriage driver in Central Park. That was the first one. And I followed that up with a stint doing corporate moves in moving files, believe it or not, paper files from Midtown to the village somewhere. And random jobs like that. And the reason I did that was because I wanted time to think about, because I had to create a portfolio of ads, to get into the business. And I wanted to work for a specific guy, a famous American ad guy. And I eventually did get a job working with him, but I was obsessed with working for him only, believe it or not. And so that didn't make it easier. But that was why I did that. That's why I took those jobs, though.
So that guy I understand, was Ed McCabe.
That's right, yeah. He's the guy who created the image for Volvo as a safe car, the image, Frank Perdue, Chicken, he created that one, Hebrew National, Maxell, the guy in the chair. He did a ton of those classic advertising, iconic advertising campaigns.
I remember the Purdue punchline, which struck me as being particularly good. I think it went something like, "It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken."
That's right.
And Frank Purdue looked a bit like a plucked chicken.
That was
my perspective.
That was not lost on my former boss either. That was one of the reasons they liked him, I think, because he looked like a chicken.
Hey, Martin, I got to jump in here. Before we go on to get into the meat of the matter, he just said he was a carriage driver in Central Park. I mean, there's got to be some stories coming out of that.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple. There's a couple of good ones. And one that you got to remember that, this was 1990. So this is pre-Giuliani now. This is back when the so-called bad old days of New York, when it was a bit wilder. If you were there in the 90s, it was kind of crazy. The early 90s was a bit crazy. So we were on Central Park South. The carriage horses are usually massed on Central Park South near the Plaza Hotel. They're parked there. And so you kind of see everything. If you stand there long enough, you'll see everything that could happen, will happen in front of your eyes, So it's a very interesting place to hang out. And my first night out there, I had the worst thing that can happen to you happen to me, which is that your horse runs away from you, literally runs away. And when a horse runs away from you, just so you know, when your carriage horse runs away, it's going home because it knows the way home. And home for this horse was Hell's Kitchen. So that meant it was going to go down 7th Avenue through Times Square or make a right at 38th Street and go home. Unfortunately for us, it was 7:00 in the evening and a Saturday night, and it was New York was filled with tourists, hot July evening. And this is what happened was I was standing on the corner in Central Park South. I turned around to light a cigarette, turned around again, and my horse was just running away up Central Park South and with the carriage. And I was like imagining like German tourists being killed, just nightmares. This is the worst case scenario, And I ran after the horse, almost caught it, but didn't. And I was standing on Central Park South. I watched it turn down 7th Avenue, and 2 wheels went up in the air on the side because it was going so fast. And I'm like, oh God, this is going to be a nightmare. This is going to be all over the newspapers tomorrow, whatever happens tomorrow, And I was just one of those situations where you're just like, it can't get any worse than this, And you can't believe it's happening, but it is happening. And then just out of sort of curiosity, I decided to go up to 7th Avenue and have a look down, kind of a hill down 7th Avenue, and see what carnage was happening, with my horse. And there's Rosie O'Grady's pub there. That pub is on 7th Avenue, or used to be there. I'm not sure if it's still there. And I turn down and I see my horse being held by a New York cop. And I was like, how on earth did you stop this horse? How did you do this? Firstly, I was hugely relieved to see my horse alive and nobody dead and a cop holding it. And I was like, how the hell did you do this, guys? And I didn't even see this, but these guys were like rookie cops, and they'd been given the assignment of sitting in a van on Central Park South, waiting for people to break the light and give them tickets. That was their thing. And they'd seen my horse go by. And they noticed there was nobody driving it. And they realized this is not a good thing. Even though they were New York cops, they were like, they never seen a horse in their life. They were like, this isn't good. And they tried to catch it, actually. I didn't see this, but they couldn't. So they had the brilliant idea then of, instead of trying to catch the horse, which they knew they couldn't, they went ahead of the horse and broke the light. There's a 2-way street at 57th Street, which no horse don't stop for a light anyway. 2-way street. They went ahead and broke the light for the horse and then slowly cut the horse off. And saved it and the lives of many German tourists, I'm sure, that night. And they had my eternal gratitude, and I will never hear a bad word said about the NYPD to this day because of what they did. And they were like laughing about it. They were like, hey, here's your horse. We got him. Isn't that great? And they didn't give me a ticket. There was no bed. It's just amazing.
Well, Vinny, I understand too. In our preamble, so that was an experience you had with your carriage horse and the law.
Yes,
you had some experiences on the other side of the law.
Well, we did, and not just me. Several of my compadres. It's a long story, but basically, the net of it was that we, my friends and I, got into an altercation with a limo driver because there was bad blood between carriage drivers and limo drivers. because we were chasing the same kind of tourist dollar, and they would tell people, hey, those guys will rip you off and all this stuff. So we didn't like them. That was basically it. So one night, a bunch of us are coming back to Queens from some pub, and we're passing by Centre Park South, and we notice one of our friends is getting into it with a limo driver. So one of us decides to stop and help him out, in quotes. So we went over to him and got involved with the fight with the limo driver. It's like 4 a.m, by the way. I got involved with the limo driver, and his car may have been damaged, and whatever. Things may have occurred. And we left, having successfully intervened, thought nothing more of it. And then the following Monday, we're standing on Centre Park South, and I look around me and I see 3 guys staring really intently at us. And I look down and they've all got baseball bats. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then I look at, and they've got the limo driver with them. And I immediately knew what was going on. Even though I didn't know what was going on, I knew it was connected to that. And I was there. And it turned out that they were from the Gambino crime family, then led by John Gotti. And it turned out that limo drivers were members of the Teamsters Union, and the Teamsters Union is controlled by the Gambino family. And any problems the limo drivers had are settled by the Gambino family. And they were coming out to mete out justice to us for getting involved with the limo driver. And they basically, what they did was, they said, one of the lead Gambino guy, whatever his name was, Vinny, probably, like me. He went down the line. He said, was he there? And the limo driver went, no. Was he there? No. Was he there? And he was right before he got to me and said, was he there? And I was there, and I knew it. And I was almost going to faint from fear. Just as he said, was he there? The guy who he'd been fighting with went by in his carriage, and he went, that's him. And they all went out running after him. And I was basically like standing there, jelly-legged, ready to faint from, I came so close to getting beaten by the Gambino. And I only found this out later on about the connection to the limo drivers and all that stuff. But that's who they were. And I was like, well, that's like something from NYPD Blue. It was just, but that was New York back then, though. Things would happen in New York in those days that you just blow your mind, and this was at 7 p.m. This was not, this was 7 p.m, Centre Park South, no cops around. There's 3 Gambino guys with baseball bats, and they're about to beat the crap out of us. And that would have happened, and it wouldn't have been big news.
Interesting introduction to the sport of baseball.
Oh my God!
I'll send you back to Madison Avenue with Martin.
Yeah, just kind of boomeranging back to Ed McCabe, who I think is considered to be a seminal figure in advertising in America.
Yeah.
Now,
that's why I wanted to work for him.
You basically stalked him, from what I understand. Did you play the Irish card on that thing? Obviously McCabe's an Irish name. Did that
not
help?
at all. No, I did not. I didn't because it wouldn't have worked on him. That's why. That's number one reason. I think his mom was German, so maybe the German.
That's your concern for German tourists come from that, is it?
Yeah, I'm concerned for the German race in general at all times. But I think the German side went out there. No, I did not actually. What I did was what happened was actually that before I left London, I talked to a few creatives in London, in top agencies in London, and I asked them, I'm going to New York, who should I work for? And his name came up more than once. And I thought, well, okay, that's who I'll work for then, because he's the guy that everybody seems to like. And then I dug into what his work was and what he'd done, and I was very impressed and I felt very sort of in sync with. He had a very direct, strategically smart style, which I really liked. And so basically what I did was I found out as much as I could about him. But of course, back then, before the internet, it was very hard to find out things about people. But you could find out things like their address, so where they lived. And so I found out where he lived, and I would sometimes follow him around, unbeknownst to him, to see what kind of products he was using, and, just get a sense of him as a person. And so what I would do is I would, find out what products he used, and then I would create campaigns in his style for those products. You know what I mean? So he wouldn't know. And I did things like, I got a rejection letter from an agency in New York that's still around that he didn't like. and I knew he didn't like them. So I got a rejection letter from them, and I put that at the front of my portfolio. Like, these guys, I hope your idea of advertising isn't the same as these clowns, was the general tenor of it. So basically I worked my way into it. I had an audience of one, and I focused on him exclusively until he hired me, basically.
And how long did that campaign take?
God, it took me probably the best part of 2 years from start to finish.
That's what I call frickin' persistence.
Yeah, well, I was obsessed. You got to remember, this wasn't just a desire to get into advertising. I wanted to work for the best guy in advertising, and consequently, hopefully, be the best person. I wanted to do it right. I was very obsessed with that part of it, and I knew that it was very easy to get sidetracked by, when you're that age, to take a job for something that sounds good, and then 10 years go by and it's too late. So I was very focused on that. And like I said to you in the previous interview, my mom had died just a few years previously. So I was very aware of, how little time one has on earth and all that sort of stuff at that time, at that age, like I for all I knew, I was middle-aged at age 22. That was kind of the way I looked at it, So I was very focused and very energetic about it as well,
So getting into like meeting.
Oh, by the way, sorry. So, I should tell you this story. This is a funny story, I think. When I was putting to get into advertising, you got to have a portfolio of speculative ads, you think would be good, that you've made up, right? And so I was always on the hunt for things like that, in this period. And one of the jobs I had was I was moving files from one part of Manhattan to another, paper files, and in a van. And one day I was hanging out with one of the guys I was working with, and it turned out basically what happened was we were having a lunch outside a deli, and this guy comes up in a Mercedes convertible, leaves the engine running, and my friend Raul was going to steal the car, and he handed me his sandwich and was walking over to steal the car when the guy comes out, and I was like, "What are you going to do there, Raul?" And he says, "I was going to steal it." And he goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I was going to steal it, park it in the parking garage, and come back here. It was no big deal." Well, it turned out Raul had just gotten out of prison. He was a car thief, right? And I said, and being on the lookout for an ad for my portfolio, I said to him, "Hey, Raul, what car theft prevention device do you use?" And he said, "I use the nightstick. Those metal sticks they used to put on the steering wheel. I use the nightstick." And I said, "Why do you use the nightstick, Raul?" And he said, quote, "Man, your ass be in the joint by the time you cut through that shit." Right? That was his line. And that was my ad. That was what I was like, "That's brilliant. Stop right there. That's brilliant." And of course, my boss to be loved it too, because that was in his style, But so that was sort of give you an idea into how obsessed I was. I was always looking for those things. Sorry, just wanted to tell you that story.
No, that's beautiful.
It's still the best ad I've ever done.
What was it like getting in with Ed? And did you tell him about how you were stalking him? And
oh no, I would never have done that. No. It was strictly, for my own, because I needed to. It was research, really. You know what I mean? I'm sure he probably knows by now, but I never told him at the time because, again, for example, I didn't. This is how I didn't. In my resume, I left off the fact that I'd been to college, because he'd never been to college. So I figured, hey, that's not. So I was trying to just kind of an audience of one, basically. That was my thing,
He's an interesting character, of course, because he kind of drops out of advertising for a while to basically train or get himself ready to do the car or the car rally. This is a pretty freaking single-minded, tough guy. I don't know, obsessive, I suppose, which is actually interesting because it's actually a word I think you've used about yourself.
Yeah, right? Well, I think it takes a bit of obsession to be good at advertising. I think you have to really be into it. He was a natural, though. I think he was one of the few people. Like his thing was he was very adrenalized, very adrenalized person. And I think that's the way to come up with ideas is to be. That's the thing I learned from him was you got to be adrenalized. You can't just sit around musing about things. You got to work things like they're a puzzle.
Well, what does that mean exactly, adrenalized? Like, can you...
What I mean is you've got to, like if you're trying to come up with an idea, if I'm trying to come up with an idea for something, right? The best way to do it is to put yourself under a lot of pressure, right? And to give yourself ideally a limited time frame and just come up with it. That's it. And so what happens is you literally become adrenalized. So you're excited about this. Your blood is flowing about this. And that's when you have good ideas, when your brain is running so fast that your connections are going faster, if you know what I mean. That doesn't happen when you're not adrenalized. Like when you're not adrenalized, you're just kind of sitting there.
Yeah.
You're not really thinking, are you? If you were in a think of it like a bank job, right? Like think of it like that. Those guys are adrenalized. That's a good frame of mind to be in when you're trying to make decisions, to be adrenalized. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it just helps.
Flow. I had a job which for quite a while, which had this sort of up and down cycle throughout the year from, kind of not a lot going on to incredible amounts going on to not a lot going on to incredible amounts. And during the not too much going on, I found it hard to, move one paper to the other side of the desk, to sign one form. Yeah. But during the other times, I was accomplishing incredible amounts of stuff because I had to.
And advertising is very much like that. Like we would have, the summer months basically off, and then the Super Bowl would come around and we'd have to, go crazy for 4 months, And it helps in that environment if you have to do things over and over again. If you can just you need some tricks, to get you past, the initial, because you're going to run out of ideas over time, and then you got to come up with new ones. And the only way to do that is to be on all the time, sort of,
So I'm guessing that medical practitioners and their concern over stress, etc., probably don't approve of your adrenalized approach toward your career. Would that be fair, or is that something you've ever actually talked about?
I don't think so. I think it's a good way to do it. I'm naturally kind of an energetic person anyway, but I think that it helped. Like if you to have a career, sustain a career of coming up with ideas, you do need techniques and tricks to help you. You need otherwise it's just random ideas. And that's not what advertising is about.
Well, Vinny, we're going to get into some of your ads in a little more detail, but let's get you from New York to Chicago with a stop in Boston.
Yes.
You're certainly gravitating towards the Irish cities. What brought you to Boston? And maybe you could bring us to as you bring us to Chicago, talk about the Irish scenes or the Irish vibe in these three cities, how they were different and what an Irish accent did for you in each of them.
Absolutely. Well, the first place I came to obviously was New York, and that was very formative because I lived there for 5 years in Queens, which is in an Irish enclave actually of New York, and it was very much the immigrant experience. It was very much if you probably know Woodside and Sunnyside, those areas. It was a lot of us younger Irish immigrants all together at the same time. It was great fun. But it was very much an immigrant experience. And then what happened was after working for this guy, Ed McCabe, I got a job working on Bud Light in Chicago. So I went to Chicago for that. I was just purely for the job. And while I was there, we found out we're having our first child. And so that was interesting because that was news. And so we stayed there for 2 years, and I worked on Bud Light, and I did some... you remember the I Love You Man Bud Light thing? Okay. I was there for that. I didn't do it, but I was there for that craze. And it was very educational in terms of how to make a catchphrase popular. And I did a couple of commercials that were not as big a hit as What's Up, but they were noted hits within the advertising community, and people liked them in general. And so that led to a job in Boston for more money because I had a kid and everything. And I lived in Boston for 2 years. I worked on Reebok mostly, and didn't particularly like what I was doing there compared to beer, So I went back to Chicago, And I got hired on Bud. They liked me at this agency, DDB. So they rehired me to work on Budweiser this time. And that was how I did it. It was all job related, you know. Mm-hmm. So it was all, I wasn't happy in Boston. So I went to Chicago, and then I stayed there because I just liked beer advertising. It was all we did, you know. We did it all day, every day, which was unusual, I think, in advertising. I think most people would work on, say, you know, a car and a cleaner and insurance or whatever. We just did Budweiser all day long.
So can I ask, you live in these three, you know, heavily Irish American cities.
Uh-huh.
Do you try to kind of use that Irish connectivity as part of, you know, that experience, or is it just you just naturally gravitated to it? Or?
Well, I think in the case of New York, when I lived here, it was functional. You know what I mean? It was everybody, you know, it's a natural place to come and the way to live. But once I moved to Chicago, I had a child, so I had very much less interaction with. I really no interaction with the Irish community in Chicago, to be honest with you. The first time I was there, and similarly in Boston, I was there for the job, not so much for the, you know, there's a reason I left Ireland, you know, as well. So, you know, I didn't come to America to hang out with Irish people. That was not my, you know, not that I have nothing against Irish people, but it wasn't my predominant, you know, goal once I was in advertising, you know, because secondly, because there's so few Irish people in advertising. I was probably, I felt like the only one, you know,
So I think, you know, personally, as a child of the 60s growing up in Ireland, the country that I left in 1983, I kind of almost made it a point to disconnect from Ireland because, and I think it's probably true of a lot of people from that era.
Yeah.
There was a certain amount of bitterness, you know, associated with the fact that we had to leave because there wasn't a whole lot in terms of opportunity within Ireland. Is that reflective of your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was the same thing. I mean, you know, the 80s was a grim decade in Ireland. And it was great fun for me because but it wasn't, you know, it was not a good time. And so, yeah, I was not, you know, I didn't leave Ireland. I was like happy to be out of it because it's a small country, number one. And so, you know, that's reason enough to leave. But yeah, there was an element of that to it as well. And also, too, in my case, it didn't behoove me to stay in the Irish culture because my work took me into the American culture. So I had to really make a conscious decision to like be interested in things that otherwise wouldn't interest me simply because it might be useful. So, for example, one of the things I found really useful when I came over to the United States in this regard was Nick at Night. You remember Nick at Night, the TV channel? They would show all the old American sitcoms, right? From the set. So I watched all of these shows and I was like, well, now I know everything about America, don't I? Because I'd seen all the shows. I got all the references, you know? So that was kind of the way I was thinking I needed to immerse myself in the American culture because my work required that really, you know, for it to work. Because I couldn't be the guy going, hey, who's Mark and Mindy? Who's who's Opie and, you know, whatever.
So, just on a contemporary note, did you happen to see WandaVision, that TV series?
I have not seen that one, no.
Because it's a kind of a recreation of 3 or 4 sitcoms with this weird superhero overlay. Oh. So it's just kind of weird, like you're taking these people through these sitcom eras. It's sort of this kind of fantasy world that was created by one of the characters that everybody's living in. It's pretty effective.
Well, it was also very illuminating because it you know, that was when TV was at its best in some regards. You know what I mean? Like The Honeymooners is still probably one of the best shows of all time. If they still show that in New York at night.
Yeah. I mean, you come across it all the time. I'm not sure if it's on Channel 11 or Channel 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my introduction into America at the time. Late night TV in New York, 1983.
Yeah.
Get back home, and there was MASH and the Honeymooners on, starting at 11 o'clock at night, and then midnight Star Trek came on.
Yes, the original Star Trek, right?
Yeah, the original Star Trek. And so, yeah, that was my kind of intro. I just wanted to boomerang back again to this kind of, you know, I'm nudging away because I'm an Irish stew guy. At the Irish part, you know, being, obviously you've immersed yourself now in American TV culture because your job required that of you. But over the last 20 or so years or 30 so years of your career, has the Irish thing helped or hindered? In other words, how has that changed your perspective as somebody that works in the advertising business that is not a native-born American? Has it helped or hurt?
I say it's helped immensely because if you live in another culture, you automatically have a different point of view on things. So everything is a bit strange. Everything's a bit new. Like hot dogs, what are they? They're crazy. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? So you look at everything fresh, and so you have automatically you have a different point of view. So automatically your ideas are going to be different by virtue of who you are and by virtue of the experiences you've had. So so it does give you a different point of view on things. The other thing that it helped me enormously with was, that our being Irish helped with, is that people generally like Irish people in America. If you say you're from Ireland, you get a smile, and people are like, I've always wanted to go there, or something like that. So that doesn't hurt. You know what I mean? It makes your life a bit easier, even if sometimes they think you're from Scotland. But
not bad either.
Whatever. But you know what I mean? So that, broadly speaking, it's been a help in a social context because people like us and think we're funny. And then specifically, it was helpful to me in that, when I look at an American brand or the culture in general, society, I would have a different view on things automatically, usually, not always, but you would have an edge on things. Like, for example, with Budweiser, I always thought that Americans just didn't appreciate it. That was the problem. That was the real problem with Budweiser. And Americans would kind of look down on Budweiser because, hey, it's everywhere and it's been around for everywhere. And I'd be like, well, no, that might be true, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it's a great beer and maybe you should like it. That was, and I don't think I would have had that impulse,
Mm-hmm. I was always amused that, certainly when I came to America in the 80s, like one of the advertising campaigns was some kind of beer ad that said, and the tagline was, never tasted so imported, with basically the viewpoint that American beer sucks, and the only good beer can be imported.
Yes. Well, if you remember, if you go back to the 1983, which is probably the peak era for the Coors, Miller, all those guys, the American beers and Budweiser. It was like there was so little choice in the country because of Prohibition. Prohibition killed all the small brewers. Mm-hmm. That's why this kind of oligopoly of beer existed, because the major brewers were the only ones that could survive the Prohibition. And so really the influx of craft beer and all that stuff, that's very recent. In terms of thing. I'm sorry, I'm getting off the thing. No. But yeah, there was a perception that American beer, it's it was all light lager. That wasn't much of a choice, was it?
Yep. No, you're talking about my bad habits here, and yes, I'm a devotee of the whole craft beer experience.
Oh yeah, well, it was badly needed in this country. Really.
I do remember I grew up in Connecticut, and there were a lot of brands that have, that were still competitive regionally that have all disappeared. They weren't craft beers; they were kind of
like Rolling Rock beers. Kind of things.
Rolling Rock, a Knickerbocker, Schaefer, Hull's Export.
They all went away, right?
They did,
and Sam Adams used their brewing capacity to make his beer.
Interesting. Well, we've been sort of circling around the beer tap here, Vinny. So let's pour ourselves a pint of that Budweiser. And by the way, pints, we never got beer out of pints. That's something that came over from your side of the pond.
And you've got a different measure anyway. So
so let's pour ourselves a Bud and find out about that famous commercial. How did it start? How did you ever sell the idea? Tell us about WASSUP.
Well, what happened was, like I said, I'd been working on Bud Light, and I'd seen this "I love you, man" thing blow up, literally in front of us, and I had plenty of time to think about that. And so one of the things about, again, like the agency I worked at, DDB Chicago, we just worked on beer. So consequently, Bud Light and Budweiser. So consequently, we got good at it. We had I personally, my first commercial was a hit, which was nice. And my second commercial was pretty big too. And that was what the environment that we were in. They wanted that. They wanted popular advertising. They wanted funny, popular advertising that ideally had a cultural impact. They'd had that themselves. They'd had that with those lizards and frogs thing. That was big. That was the advertising campaign that they had when I came along with WASSUP. And that was very popular. But in my estimation, it suffered from the fatal flaw of having animated characters in it and not people, because people drink beer. I know it was funny, but it just kind of didn't do it for me for that regard. And so one of the side effects of this, working on Budweiser and beer in general, is that you have creative freedom. And when you have creative freedom, you kind of have to come up with things all the time. And so when you have to kind of come up with things all the time, one of the things you do is you're always on the lookout for things that you might use in a beer commercial, because you never know. And a friend of mine showed me a short film, and it showed a bunch of, it was a short film that was created by a director for a short film festival, and it was featured the guys in the commercial shouting "What's up" at each other. That was the basis of the short film. It was about 2 minutes long. And I loved this short film, and I thought it was very funny, and I just couldn't stop saying "What's up." And I would show this film. This is on a VHS tape, by the way. I would show this VHS tape to other people, and they would also shout "What's up." They couldn't not say it. Once you'd seen this, you couldn't not say "What's up." And so that made me think that everybody would have this reaction, And it was because the situation in the short film was the guys were like in the commercial. They were watching football on TV and just saying nothing really. And that was good, because that was exactly the situation that most of our viewers would be in when they saw the commercials, because the commercials aired on live TV, sports. So it was very, fortuitous in that regard. So I thought that if we, made minor adjustments to this, it would be a great Bud ad. And I showed it to my boss, and he liked the idea too. He saw the potential of it, and he showed it to the clients, and they too. So went, okay, yeah, we could see this, try it. And what you have to remember is that this was like September 1999. Every year, Budweiser and Bud Light had 5 minutes in the Super Bowl. That's 10 commercial spots to fill. So they would produce about 30 ads. And this was one of those ideas. So it wasn't like we had to sell them really hard on it. They were like, okay, we could see how that could work. Make it work, And they gave us the money to go away and do that. And we pitched it to them as, because of my limited experience, I said, this will be a huge hit. Everyone's going to be saying "What's up." That's the goal here, And that actually happened, but it went beyond that thanks to the internet. But that was basically the way it went. It was very seamless and easy,
Can I ask? So the movie, I believe, this short movie was called True.
Yes.
I think it was directed by Charles Stone III, I believe.
That is correct, yeah.
How does that work? What are the mechanics from an advertising point of view? Because you could say that, you brought that from a movie and you basically transposed it into an ad campaign for Budweiser, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are the intellectual property challenges that are at play there? How do you work that out?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because it was the order in which we did it, which was, again, we didn't know we couldn't contact him, because it was, this is pre-internet. Everything's on the internet. So all we had was his name. And so what happened was I tracked him down. We sold the idea, by the way. We sold the idea. The client was, yep, we'll do it for the Super Bowl. Let's do it. Well, he didn't know this. He had no idea, because we didn't know. So I had to contact him and go, hey, good news, guy. I'm Vinny, and we just sold your film as a Bud ad. And will you do it? What do you think about that, number one? And will you do it, number two? And I think he might have been a bit leery of us, because, I'm sure he imagined that we would take his lovely African-American film and turn it into a Middle American nightmare somehow, Pepsi fiasco.
With Clydesdales galloping across the screen.
Oh, yeah. Or "What's up? I'll tell you what's up. The great taste of Budweiser beer. Made from only the finest ingredients. That's what's up. That's what I'm enjoying right now. So, but when I assured him that we didn't want to do that, and what I wanted to do was basically recreate that short film, add the line "watching the game, having a Bud," which just so it would be a Bud ad, you know.
Yep.
And literally that would be what they weren't drinking beer in the short film, and so that was it. That was what I wanted to do, and so so we had to then purchase the rights to this short film. And so there was a precedent for this. Bud Light had bought a sketch from the Ben Stiller TV show. And we'd paid him like $50,000, I think it was, for the rights to the sketch. And he's Ben Stiller. He's a big star, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, listen, it's $50,000. That's the going rate per the Ben Stiller thing, which wasn't a huge hit, but it was still nonetheless Ben Stiller. And I was like, $50,000, that's what it'll be probably. But you will get to, you know, direct this with complete creative freedom from us and me, and it'll be great fun, and you'll love it, you know, and we'll have a good time. And so we agreed, and we did it, and it was like that. We did it. We had a great time doing it, and it was so much fun and very easy. But it was a very boring shoot, obviously, because you're looking at guys shouting into phones all day long. You know, there's nothing happening in this commercial, really. And that was it. So we bought the rights to, I think Anheuser-Busch actually owned the rights to the film for like 5 years. I think they bought the rights to it for 5 years. But the guys got paid a lot of money from residuals, you know, because they were on TV all the time. They got all this money every time the commercial aired. So that was good, you know. They got paid. It wasn't like some people thought we ripped them off, you know. And no one got ripped off, trust me.
Vinny, you know, this thing is just taking off. I showed it to my wife from Italy last night. She knew the commercial. It's been spoofed in The Simpsons, The Office. I got to tell you, today I picked up the Daily News. In the comic section, there's a little comic called Between the Lines. It's a little square comic. It sort of does a lot of plays on words. It shows a picture of two beans, like baked beans, you know, and they're dressed as hipsters. And the line on top is, what's chili made from? And the line at the bottom is cool beans. And the one bean is saying, no, I'm saying, and the other bean is saying, yeah, what's up? So today in the Daily News.
Yeah, the funny thing about that commercial was that for me was that I was delighted that it was a hit. You know, obviously that was the goal. And I was surprised that it was a global hit. And I was further surprised by all the parodies, you know, that emerged online. And then the layer on top of that was all the media references. So this was kind of like the perfect result. Everything was going perfectly well, you know, for us. And I'll never forget, I knew it was going to be crazy when about 3 months into it, shortly after the Irish experience in Galway, when I saw it, we were in New York shooting the sequels to the WASSUP campaign. And it was a Saturday night, I remember. And we were really tired. And I remember all our phones started ringing. We were in the lobby of our hotel. And it was our friends and family calling to tell us that Saturday Night Live had just opened their new season with a sketch, a parody of WASSUP, you know, which ordinarily would have been cause for like great excitement and celebration. But at that point, we were just like, oh, that's great. Yeah, wonderful. Click. What do you want to eat? You know, like it wasn't even that thing, which would probably be most, you know, the biggest thing to happen in most people's advertising career, being parodied on Saturday Night Live, was just one more thing in this thing that just seemed to have a life of its own, and it had a life of its own. That was the thing. It went beyond our control very early on, and it just took off and went skyward, and it was just very strange. But the impact of that can be felt to this day, because I think like if you were 15 back in 2000, that made a huge impact in your life. And so to this day, there's a lot of people who still have a very fond memory of it. So now they're in a position where they can make movies and stuff. So they make references to it. Like Andy Samberg from Saturday Night Live seems to have an obsession with referencing the campaign. I'd love to ask him about it someday, but he's done it so many times.
I don't know if you saw it, Vinny, but I noticed Canadian Budweiser did an updated version of the ad using digital devices doing WhatsApp, which I thought was hysterical.
Good idea.
Bust my gut laughing, you know? Yeah. But yeah, there's no doubt that it resonates. But what are the implications for your career of this? You know, this is a dream success as an ad man. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was the perfect storm of
results, in terms, especially for beer advertising, because beer advertising, you want to be popular and you want it to be liked, and it was liked and very popular, and so it was, but it was one of those things where it was, it made you famous. Like that was the immediate within our industry. That is, I mean, obviously, most people in the public probably think that the guys in the commercial came up with it, but it made me famous, and it was just a very, I'll tell you what, for 2 years, basically, me and my partners, we went all around the world getting our asses kissed by everybody and winning all the awards and being interviewed endlessly and all those things that are kind of your fantasy, if you will. And they all happened for us more than once. And the experience was so unique. Very few people get to experience that, phenomenal fame, pop culture impact stuff. And, but the problem with that is that, like, I don't think people see, many people look at it and go, oh, we need that, or they do, but they don't have the situation. Like one of the things that made Budweiser advertising so successful was the marketing department at Anheuser-Busch really knew their stuff. They were experts in their field. And so, it was a great learning experience as well. But I think the beer category is kind of its own thing in the same way that the auto industry is seen as its own thing. It's got its own rules. It's a very complicated purchase decision, and all that lovely stuff. But for me, that was the best part of it, was the education I got from seeing how the culture works and having sort of access to the gears of culture. Because if we did a commercial, it was famous next week. You don't get that. Like it would literally be, it would be on every live sports thing, and by next week it would be famous. So that was the thing that I got most out of it.
Vinny, I know we could go into a lot of campaigns and other great ads, but let's move you over to the Escape Pod, the business you started. And as Martin and I were looking at some of the campaigns, what we saw as a shift to this more kind of experiential based marketing advertising approach. Yeah.
Well, what happened was, if you look at the history of advertising over the last 30 years, which is how long I've been at it, what's happened, basically what's happened is that the internet happened basically to advertising. And that had a couple of implications. And I think one of the things that I think that the WASSUP campaign was good at was it was less a funny commercial and more of an experience. Like you were involved with this, you shouted WASSUP, that was, you more than once probably, and so it was experiential in that regard. And I think that as people's attention has gotten harder to get through things like TV advertising, things have to be more of an experience in general. So a lot of the stuff one of the things I've leaned into in the past 15, 20 years has been real life. I've done a lot of like hidden camera stuff, kind of pranky stuff. Reason being that because it can be a good commercial, it can yield good video, but B, it can be more of a trip for the viewer because it's real and there's an element of the uncontrolled about it, And so the more people can get involved with things, the better, So that's one of the things that I've found. One of the consequences of the internet has been that for me.
Vinny, I saw a quote of yours where you say, "Staying the same is death." So
well, it is, yeah. I mean, that's the thing about. The culture moves slowly, things evolve, things change. So what works 10 years ago won't work today because the context is different, because all we have is the context that we go into, right? And so the context is everything. And so if you're looking at, say, the country like the USA, you got to look at the culture, you got to look at where your brand is in the culture, where does it have a place in the culture? And if it does, that's a good thing. But if it doesn't, and you're trying to get to that place, you just need to be, you've got to react more to the times that you're in,
Vinny, you're reacting to the culture and the times, and I want to take you to a project that really falls outside of the scope of advertising, to a very impactful work you were involved with called the Metro Gun Share.
Oh, yes.
Could you describe, obviously we're audio, so people we'll be able to share pictures on our website. Could you describe the project and the impact?
Yeah, I mean, that was one that was a rare. I've done very little public service stuff over the years, so I feel really bad about that. But one issue that's always bothered me, and it bothers most people who come to this country who aren't from this country, is the gun thing. You know, the crazy proliferation of guns and the free access to guns. You know, regardless of any common sense, and that always bothered me. And so it was an issue that was close to my heart. And so we wanted to do something that would get talked about, right? You always want that. But this time we really, this was mandatory for this. So we were thinking, how would we do something in Chicago that would get talked about? And we noticed that they'd recently brought in all those, those bike sharing programs. And they all have this sort of really nice, elegant, when you see them all parked, there's some kind of real visual, something very pleasing visually about seeing all these bikes parked in their docks and they're all blue and whatever. So one night, I remember we were actually in a hotel in LA and we were talking about this, and we had this idea of, well, why not do a thing parodying that, but for gun share? So we're going to make it look like you can just come up and put a credit card in and get an AR-15. So we created this sort of gun sharing dock, a sculpture of fake AR-15s. It was painted blue like the blue bikes here in Chicago. And the whole thing looked like a gun sharing thing. And we plonked it down in Daley Plaza in the middle of Chicago. I don't know how we got that, but we got permission to do that. And people looked at it and they went, is this real? Have we gone that far? Is this where we're at in the culture that we can now get an AR-15? And of course they couldn't, but it was to illustrate that this is kind of where the culture is at. Like the fact that this thing could conceivably be a thing in our culture is crazy. And the fact that it existed, we wanted to people are already polarized on the issue. We didn't want to, we know we're not going to convert, pro-gun people to becoming, pro-gun control, but we wanted to stimulate a conversation. And it did that.
It, in the place of where you'd put the credit card to rent the gun, you make
a donation to the Brady campaign. It was done for the Brady campaign to prevent handgun violence. That they were the client, and so we just wanted to blow it up, and we had a little poster because it exactly mimicked the architecture of those bike share programs. And on the poster, we had this argument about how because Indiana has no gun laws, basically, Chicago's so-called strict gun laws won't work because it's not an island. I mean, it's just over the border. So it doesn't make, you can't, it's not an island in the Pacific, as Rahm Emanuel said. So therefore those gun laws are useless until we have federal gun laws. That was our argument, So that was it. And it worked like crazy. I mean, every news outlet in the world carried it. It was just arresting. I mean, you looked at it and you were just like drawn to it. It was like, is that real? That was the goal of it. And people you could interact with it, you could give money to it, you could get education from it. And people showed up to argue both sides of it. It became like this a gathering place for people who were concerned about the issue. It worked really well. I was very happy with it.
Can you talk a bit about, obviously you put this sculpture out there, all right? And then it's picked up by the media. This again is another example of, incredible success. But how do you measure that degree of success? When you go back to the client, right? The Brady Bill folks, right?
Yeah.
How do you go back to them and say, look, this is what I have done for you?
Well, in that case, it was very easy because this was an all or nothing, all in proposition. So if you put a 30-foot half-ton sculpture in Daley Plaza and nobody pays attention, then you failed. But the idea was to create media attention, and we got so much media attention. It was, it was embarrassing almost how much people talked about it, and that was it. So that was the goal there, was purely to get media attention and to get people talking about it online, all that sort of stuff. And that worked really well. People were tweeting about it. It was basically an Instagram trap. It was designed to be an Instagram trap as well. So you couldn't not take a picture of this thing, you know? And so it worked really well in that regard. So in the case of, say, for example, Budweiser, their problem was they had a 10-year sales decline in sales, right, in America. And so the proof there was that it reversed the sales trend. So that was what mattered in Budweiser. And unintentionally, it had a huge effect on sales worldwide as well, because the campaign was so big worldwide that it became the advertising campaign in Ireland, France, Japan, everywhere, you know. So and it aired for free on the internet. That was the thing about it. We didn't have to pay a penny for any of this. It all went through the internet, right? So that's kind of the way it works. It's like it depends on what your objective is. You know, Budweiser wanted their brand to be talked about and be cool, so that was huge, and they wanted to sell more beer. In the case of the Brady campaign, they wanted to get a lot of attention for their issue, and we did that, I think, in a very smart way. So it depends on what your objective is. Generically, the goal in all marketing is to sell more stuff. You know, generally speaking, that's usually the metric. But sometimes it's different. Sometimes you want to change attitude. Sometimes you want to. A very common task in advertising is to make an old brand seem new again. You know, that's a very common one.
Well, we look forward to like when the gun control issue will be an old brand that nobody wants to see new again.
I know.
And particularly for Chicago. Vinny, let's we've taken up a good amount of your time. Let's bring the listeners up to date. What's Vinny Warren doing these days? What's next on the agenda?
Well, I've recently left my post at the Escape Pod. At the beginning of the year, I kind of had I wouldn't say a midlife crisis, because if it was to be a midlife crisis, I'd live to be 110, and that's not very going to happen. But I had a reevaluation of my life, and I just realized that it had become sort of Groundhog Day for me, and it wasn't as challenging or as interesting as it could be. So I'm now a freelance consultant, and my work can be seen at vinnywarren.com, Vinny with a Y, not IE. Mm-hmm. It's the wrong spelling of Vinny, by the way. So I'm doing that, and I'm doing that actually for a very prominent UK brand, which I'm not at a liberty to disclose, but you've heard of it, and I'm working on them right now. And I'm also doing creating in the middle of creating a TV show.
Fantastic! Oh,
that only I could come up with. That's the thing about the TV show. Only I could have come up with this one.
Nice,
so that's what I'm doing right now.
You're teasing us. We're getting interested here.
Hopefully it'll be a reality, but that's what I'm working on right now. It's by the way, it's also intended to be good. This TV show will be a good thing. That's the idea behind it.
Vinny, what's we told you about our good friend Seamus Plug and your chance to plug something of your own, something you're doing, something you're interested in.
Well, I mean, what I'm interested in right now is meeting new clients and new people. So that's if I would advise you and urge you to go to vinnywarren.com and check out my work and see if it's a good fit. I love what I do. I still love what I do. I've always loved the idea of connecting with people and changing their behavior. That's kind of my passion, I guess.
And when you go to vinnywarren.com, you see a picture of Vinny petting a puma.
That's right, a mountain lion. Yeah,
the man who tamed the advertising beast.
That was a funny one. You know, that particular picture, I can explain why I was patting a lion. We'd had a few drinks, number one, and it was very early in the morning. And we went to this. We were shooting a Budweiser commercial, and the commercial involved a dog, and the dog was there, but the animal wrangler had brought along a mountain lion. And I stumble out of the car at 6 a.m, and I'm like, "Hey, this must be one of those harmless movie lions which don't exist." And I went over and started treating it like it was a cat. I was cuddling with the mountain lion, and the guy comes over and goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm just patting the old mountain lion." And he goes, I said, "Where'd you get him?" He goes, "I just got that mountain lion. I'm trying to get him used to being around people." Well, that was a good start. Me coming up and hugging him and getting my picture taken with him. Oh my God. Oh, don't pet the mountain lions, people. It's not a good idea.
There's an ad there somewhere, right?
Oh my God.
So with that, Vinny, that public service announcement in terms of interacting with wild felines, I'd like to thank you on behalf of both me and John and our Irish Stew listeners.
Oh, thank you.
Great to get an insight into the advertising business from a guy that's probably made one of the most seminal, advertising campaigns, certainly in the last 50 years. So it's been a real pleasure, and I thank you.
It was a pleasure for me too. Thank you, guys. It was great fun.
And Benny, before we let you go, I also want to send out thanks to Paul Finnegan, our arch rival in podcasting in New York.
Paul.
A Galway man who suggested we get in touch with you.
A good man, Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Hey, Martin, that was another global Irish conversation. We're going from Galway to London to New York, a brief stop in Boston, and on to Chicago with Vinny Warren. How did the conversation hit you?
Well, there's a couple of words that kind of popped out to me in that conversation. One of them was the word adrenalized, which I don't think is an FDA-compliant concept. Another word is obsession, which probably indicates some other troubling aspects, but actually in Vinny's form seems to be much more benign. But what you certainly get a sense for is a guy that's really inquisitive, who has a restless mind and constantly looking for a way to come up with a new idea to hook in a customer so you can, as he says, sell stuff.
I thought his career trajectory was among the most interesting. He parlayed being a bartender, observing why it was people bought the beer they did, basically turned that into a career later in life with his legendary ad campaigns for Budweiser. And he is able to bring in a kind of a native interest in psychology, mix it with pop culture, and he was off on a fascinating career.
The other thing, obviously, that I have in common with Vinny is we immigrated almost around the same time. And it was interesting to hear him talk about Nick at Night, how that was, to some degree, his entree into American pop culture. Not having grown up here, he needed to watch all those backlist shows like The Honeymooners or Andy Griffith, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And so he was able to come up with that, if you will, basic literacy in American pop culture. But more importantly, which probably made him very effective, is his Irish perspective, because he looked at everything with a fresh eye. He questioned everything. And so things that we take as day-to-day now that are part of our regular culture, he would question those and probably turn them in a little bit different way, give a different perspective, and that gets people's attention. And that's what you want.
He's perfectly willing to be lucky. We got won the green card lottery. That's what brought him over here. He had a goal of how he wanted to proceed in advertising, and he went at it by the very typical way of becoming a carriage driver in Central Park and a mover of office files. And I was so fascinated by that strategy. Like, don't pigeonhole yourself in a certain element of advertising until you're ready. And he got himself ready. He took courses, he did his sort of working man stuff during the day, getting himself ready for the right job in advertising. And then how he found his way to that right job was great.
Yeah, anybody that spends 2 years stalking one prospective employee, you've got to admire their stick-to-itiveness, if that's even a word. He knew what he wanted, he went after it, he got it, and he's been hugely successful.
It was a great strategy because I was talking to my daughter who's heading into her senior year in college. And I used it for her, like as an example. Don't follow this particular strategy, but come up with your own strategy that's out of the mainstream. You're not just going to send resumes off into the ether. Come up with your own personal strategy. That's how you're going to stick out. Before we wrap it up, we had a great time talking about the WASSUP campaign. It was a lot of fun, and we found the backstory. But I really appreciated hearing about his Metro gun share idea. And we'll, of course, have pictures of it in the show notes. But he really liked everything together in that event, that program, that experience, and was really doing it for a great cause.
Amen.
Well, Martin, a lot of our listeners ask how they can help spread the global Irish conversation. What do you think?
Best thing people can do to help out the podcast is to simply share the episode. If you like what you've heard so far in this episode or other episodes, share it on social media, whether that's Facebook or whether that's Twitter or whether that's Instagram. or share it via email or word of mouth. All of those things are going to help us out. And don't be shy about dropping us a note. You can do so on our website.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.